Welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of the Sideboard podcast. Today we have me and Tim, your hosts, and then Josh Valenzuela as a guest. Introduce yourself, Josh.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Joshua Valenzuela. If you guys don't know, I've been playing pretty much since the game started. Set one. I used to play a couple card games back in the day. Yu-Gi-Oh, a little bit of Vanguard, Pokemon TCG. Dabbled in that a little bit. But yeah, the big thing that got me in this game was, obviously I like the anime, but I really like the mechanics of the card game. And I like to build pretty casual brews, but I also like to play competitive and travel to big events and stuff. So yeah, happy to be on the show.
Nice. We're glad to have you.
Glad you're here, Mr. Valenzuela.
Inside joke there. All right, so everybody, we're going to talk about Set 10, the meta, and what we call Attack of the Unisons for today. So first I wanted to go over a little bit about Unisons. For our non-Dragon Ball listeners, they might ask, well, what's a Unison card? So basically, a Unison card is what I would call a Planeswalker from Magic. It's the same thing in Dragon Ball, except a few key differences. The first difference is going to be that the cost of it is going to be X, where in Magic, X means any number. And so you can pay any number for the Dragon Ball Unison. You just have to pay the minimum based on what its specified cost is. So for example, a Unison with 2 green specified costs a minimum of 2, but you could pay 5 if you wanted to, and it would come in with 5 counters on it. So that's one of the main differences. The next difference is in the design. Bandai kind of wanted them to act as a second leader to soak up attacks and get around certain negates for attacks and such, and also have abilities to act like a leader where you can draw or have some kind of ultimate effect. In Magic, we call these loyalty abilities. In Dragon Ball, I don't think they really have a name. They're just kind of the effects. They're once per turn per Unison. So a key thing is that you can play a Unison, do its effect, play another one which kills the first one, and then do its effect again until you run out of energy. So that's one key thing to note about Unisons. And then finally, let's go to how to remove them. The only current way is there's a few cards that remove counters, but the main thing is through combat damage. And so if you attack into a Unison, you can remove markers based on what kind of strike you have, or single strike, double strike, triple strike, etc. And the biggest thing there is that they don't get a defensive step, so you cannot like Senzu or combo defensively or anything like that. Either you block, negate, or it's going to take damage. So that's just a little bit about Unisons if you don't know what they do. If you have any more questions, you can visit the Dragon Ball Super card game page, and they have a whole breakdown of exactly how they work. So we're going to go right into our next topic here. It's going to be first impressions of the Unisons and Set 10 in general. Let's go ahead and start with Tim and see what he thinks.
All right, yeah. So when the reveals first started happening for Set 10, I know a lot of people, including myself, were pretty excited that green finally became relevant in the game.
Absolutely.
I know before I started playing, it was relevant in like one small season where there was droids or cell chains.
That was back in the Set 2 meta. It was very not fun.
Yeah, I wasn't around for that, but I've heard war stories. But green is like borderline maybe the best color in the game right now. I mean, they seem to have more tools than any other color and more versatility. I mean, they got one of the best negates in the game now. It's got really efficient hand destruction, great attacks, a lot of versatility in there now. I know with the more recent bans and stuff like that, green definitely hedged its way up a little more than it was.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that green before Set 10, a lot of people were like, oh, green just kills stuff and that's all they do. But they were very like energy inefficient. And so with a lot of their new cards that just make them more efficient, as well as a lot of their powerhouse cards that came out, they just went from like tier trash to like tier 1, if not tier 2, on most green decks. Even like some of the really old ones that phased out of the meta are coming back just because green got a bunch of tools.
Yeah, and a lot of the older green cards end up working really well with the new ones. Not that they like synergize with like, you know, tribe or I guess in this game it's special trait or character trait.
Yeah, that would be like Alien or Universe
Yeah.
7 or whatever.
I mean, they don't necessarily synergize in that way, but you know, things that will play themselves by sacking off a battle card with a certain cost. There's a lot of those kind of synergies that make, you know, older and newer green cards work really well together and do some really kind of busted stuff.
Yeah, I think so. What do you think about the green in set 10, Josh?
Yeah, I think actually green is definitely really good with set 10. I noticed before, like prior to set 10, like green really it struggled with finding an identity, and you rarely saw, like, it was almost like green couldn't stand on its own, because you saw there was also obviously in set 9 there's a lot of, you know, obviously that was kind of the rise of multicolor, and you'd see a lot of multicolor deck strategies, and a lot of them did, you know, would see green as one of the dual colors, but you would rarely see, you know, you could see mono red aggro or even some mono blue decks, but you very rarely saw any mono green decks.
Or even in the dual color decks, like you would see mono red cards, but you wouldn't see any mono green cards really.
Right, and I would notice too, a lot of those decks that were using dual or tricolor and including green, most of the times, like, you're really struggling to find good quality green cards to make up, like, you know, let's say you needed 10 to 12 cards that were green. It was really hard to find useful, you know, green cards, because a lot of the green cards were very specific to certain strategies. There wasn't a lot of generically good just green cards, you know, like you would always see like Draftbox Piccolo from Draftbox 4 just because it was generically good.
Right, I see.
Yeah, so you kind of like before set 10, if you were adding green cards into your deck, it was like Draftbox Piccolo, Vegeta the Cruel, and then there's nothing else.
Yeah, or there also is the splash of a Dropbox 4, Goku Black Rose, and Zamasu.
That was a good little package, but it was only really good in like a couple decks.
In certain strategies, yeah.
Right, and we didn't have that format for very long either.
That's true.
Yeah.
So another one of not just mine, but I think our in general impressions from the beginning of set 10 testing, even up through now with, you know, some more bans and other announcements and stuff, has been that you need to play more of a value game than before. It's like anything that you do at minimum needs to at least be like a 2-for-1, if not more. 1-for-1ing with your opponent isn't really going to get you there anymore. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's interesting.
Yeah, at the base, I mean, the game went from where, like you were saying, a 1-for-1 basis to where you'd play cards like the 1-drop Majin Buu or things that gave you a body and popped one of their bodies. But now it's like that's the baseline, and so you have to go above that. One of our teammates said that the days of, it was actually Marcus Cantarsi, he said in our chat the other day that the days of 1-for-1s or +2s are dead, and you need to +3 or bust, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Yeah, just the fact that, like you were saying, like, you know, gone are the days of playing a 1-drop, say like a 1-drop Boo draw card. You know, like, sure, on its base level, that's a good, you know, it's good, but it's not gonna get you really closer to winning the game. You know, you're staying at parity pretty much. You're not actually gaining any advantage over your opponent. And also I want to tag that along to viewing the Unisons in regards to value over time. I think through kind of some playtesting, you know, actually playing with the new cards in set 10, that even though a lot of the powerful Unisons come out later, I think there's a lot of value in the 1 to 2 cost Unisons that you can drop on turn 2. and the ones specifically the ones that have plus, inherent plus effects. Because with these Unisons, since they stay on board and they're essentially extra attacks, you want to get value out of them and drop them as soon as possible, because it puts your opponent in a position where, they either have to answer your Unison and swing at your Unison, to clear it off the board. And if they do that, then that's taking attacks away from your leader, which essentially is going to prolong the game for you. Or, if they choose to ignore the Unison, then you're just inherently, gaining value, incremental value that's going to help you out in that game.
Exactly. I mean, a perfect example of that is going to be like the Demigra Unison, which is a 1 cost, and its plus effect is just to make it a 15k attacker. But if you consider that versus like the red Vegito Unison, it has a really good plus effect. It actually has 2 plus effects, but it's a 4-drop at minimum. So by the time you play it and plus it once, it's going to be turn 5 before you can ult. Whereas the Demigra has a -3 effect. So it can ult on turn 4, still not die, and then continue plussing and ult again by the time like the Vegito ults one time.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of value in the early game Unisons. Those, for a lot of decks, will kind of bridge the gap from early game to, mid or late game. Obviously depending on the deck, there are, some corner case Unisons like the Go Tanks that's played in Vegex, obviously. That's great as an early game and a late game Unison, because if you have to hard cast it, you can just go straight into a 25k double duel. Or if you mill it and play it for free, you discard a card and now it's a 15k that you can give double strike with your leader. So it's great at all points of the game. Which is why, even though, that deck got hit really hard, I still think that that's one of the more versatile and better Unisons, because it's good in all points of the game.
Yeah, I agree. It just goes back down to the base of our title for this section, which is value over time. And going off of what we were saying before, how you need value plays that are like +2 minimum or even +3 effects. You need those consistently throughout the game, or you need them to basically win the game for you on the turn they come down, like a secret rare or something, because a +3 effect will not win you the game on its own unless you do it multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
All right, so next we're going to ask Josh what his personal favorite mechanic is in set 10.
Personal favorite mechanic. I would say, I really do like the Unisons. I think just the basically the new element that they bring to the game, that new card type, is it really like it kind of, when we first came out, like the fact that they don't have combo power really made it like an interesting mechanic, because essentially in your hand, they count as extra cards. They're not actually combo power, but they have a lot of value, in playing them down early. And they're essentially battle cards. They're kind of like a 2-in-1, a battle card and an extra card. Because, some of them are meant to be attackers, and some of them have inherent effects that, give you advantage. So like for me, my personal favorite Unison out of this set is the Bardock Unison, the green Bardock Unison. And why I really like that one is because it has obviously its plus effect, which is inherently good in hand destruction strategies, as it makes your opponent discard a card and you get to revive a 1-drop, or no, you sack a 1-drop from your board to make your opponent discard a card. But what makes it good is it has this permanent effect that says once per turn, whenever your opponent chooses to combo a card, you get to place that combo card in their drop area. And it's nice because your opponent, in a way, like they can try to bait it, but they can't like easily play around it, because it's not like a once per turn, or like it's not a once, like, when they do it, it doesn't have to be the first combo card that they do. It's any time that they combo, and you can choose a card in their combo area to pop it. So it's anti-arrival. It stops these other decks that are these combo oriented decks. And and it can and the good part is it can come down really early. You could drop it on turn 2, and then you can protect it. So yeah, that would probably be my favorite Unison in this set.
Okay. Cool. What about you, Tim? Any favorite Unison or favorite mechanic that's not banned?
That's rough. I mean, out of the main set itself, honestly, I didn't look too much into the main set, because once the starter decks got revealed, I was like straight, like full beeline fast as I can into Vegex, because the leader just has this level of versatility that I feel like no other leader in the game has. It's like the Vegex leader, you burst through your deck or you mill through your deck, and as long as you have 20 cards in your graveyard or drop area, when you mill out, you reshuffle your deck. So you can use your resources effectively as many times as you want, as long as you don't exile or warp anything. And I feel like it just brings a level of inevitability, and I guess just more consistency, because you'll not just see every card in your deck once or more than once, but you'll get to use every card in your deck at least once. And I feel like other decks just don't have that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Vegex innately is value over time. I mean, when you have cards like the Foo in the drop where you pay 2 and send it to, not to warp, but you exile it from the game, and you get to get any black card back to your hand. I think it's black battle card, but irrelevant.
Yeah.
Your drop becomes a second hand. And so you have your actual hand, your drop, which gives you knowledge of what's in your deck because you're milling everything. And then you have cards that play for free. And so even like without the U3 cards that got banned, Vegex in a fundamental level is very good just because of the pure knowledge that you get.
Mm-hmm. But outside of that, because I could talk about Vegex forever.
Oh, we know.
It's tough, man. I've been looking a little more at like red and blue individually. I think the Xeno Unison is probably the overall more played Unison, just because it comes down early and it lets you start to ramp energy, because Bandai has murdered every other bit of ramp in the game at this point. And it turns on your God Ceilings on turn 2, which is really good.
Oh yeah, free counterplays are very good.
Yes, yes they are. And then with Red's in a weird spot. Like, I feel like for a long time it's been very good, and now with Green getting as much power and support as it did, Red's been kind of knocked down a bit, but I feel like it's a sleeper. People have kind of discounted Red at this point, and I feel like Red's gonna make a big wave.
Yeah, it definitely has all the tools to become like a tier 1 deck. It's just that personally it seems like not that many people are, I don't want to say brave enough because I don't want to insult anyone, but it's like people aren't brave enough to take the risk of playing a more fair deck in lieu of playing a more unfair deck that has a couple of bad matchups.
Yeah.
Like Red, I don't feel like has any innately terrible matchups, but we'll get to that later.
Definitely. What about you? What are your some of your personal favorites for the set?
It's kind of a tough one, honestly, because there's like a deck for every color that I want to build. And so I would say I really like the cards that they gave to each color that you can play for free that have something kind of unique to that color. So like Bardock the Resolute, the I think it's SS3 Goku, a Demigra, and then I forget what the fourth one is, but just saying that if you're in one of those colors and you do something that's unique to that color, you get to play this card and help you do that better. And so I think that's really good for the game. Maybe not in the instance of Bardock the Resolute because he's a little bit broken, but in the sense that if you're doing what your deck wants to do, the identity of it, we're going to strengthen that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really like the idea of color identity, and that would probably be my favorite mechanic that they put in this game, is just strengthening color identity and the ability to play monocolor decks.
Yeah, definitely. It does seem like they kind of had, sticking to color identities in mind with this set, along with some support for a couple of multicolor decks, one of which probably shouldn't have happened, but yeah.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and move into our testing results section. Now this one I just want to touch up on is going to be a little bit short because we had originally tested I would say a solid 300 games before the Vegex ban, and we had figured out the formula of how to beat it given RNGs on your side, and then the ban happened. And so a lot of our results aren't necessarily not good anymore, but they're just needed to be rechecked because we discounted some decks because of Vegex. But there's one deck in particular I want to talk about, and that is the boogeyman of the room, which is Invoker.
Yes. Previously in the backseat to Vegex. Now it is King.
Why is it King, Tim? What card made it so good?
That would be the probably single card in set 10 that should not have been printed. Son Goku Rival Seeker.
So
that card is insane.
Never should have been printed.
Snapped in half.
Not ban worthy though, I don't think. The deck can be beat.
It can. It's just so for any of the listeners who have played Magic, specifically the modern format, what this card, Son Goku Rival Seeker, created is basically the deck Splinter Twin, which for previous Magic players know that was a combo deck disguised as a control deck. So your deck was just a lot of, cantrips, counter magic, permission, and then you just had this combo finish that your opponent just couldn't really do anything about. And Rival Seeker does the same exact thing, because Invoker is already, inherently the most hard control deck in the game outside of Hatchiyak, which just stops attacks on its own. But as far as counters and stuff like that, Invoker is the way to go. But what Rival Seeker lets you do is on turn 5, just go straight into a Goku that lets you just, 8 or 7 to 0 your opponent with uninteractable burn damage.
Hey guys, just wanted to preface something really quick. I made a mistake about the Goku Rival Seeker. His effect is actually once per turn, and I didn't realize that. That's why I thought you could 8 to 0 your opponent, but you still can potentially 7 to 0 them if you have all 4 and a bunch of energy. All 4 catastrophic blows. And so just keep that in mind the rest of this podcast. Thanks for listening. All right, let's get back to it. Right, so the key here is that there's not really a cost to this Goku aside from saying that you have to be at 5 energy. And so it actually says take 2 burn spells from your exiled zone, or what we call the warp, put them back in your hand, and then you get to play this Goku on top for free, which increases how much burn your burn spells do. And so in this game, with the way energy can be manipulated, you could potentially, if you play Goku Rival Seeker on turn 4, on turn 5, when you play your other Goku, you can fail to evolve into him a couple of times and just add the 2 burn spells back to hand in order to 8 to 0 your opponent without interaction. Which is why a lot of people say it's a bad combo in this game. I mean, it does take quite a lot of setup, and the Rival Seeker itself is not immune to counter plays. It's
or
pretty
anything.
Yeah, it had no barrier, no deflect, so you can literally just pop it, or literally any counterplay in the game will kill it. It's just if you kill it this turn, I'll play it the next turn.
Yeah, and for builds of the deck that are, including like Apex, the secret rare, or other things to close out the game.
Dash Pack Goku, the other 6
that
drop.
don't necessarily need to, go through the burn plan to kill you. And you, say you kill a rival seeker, or they need to combo it, to save attacks. It's a 0-10 combo, assuming they have one multicolor extra card in their drop, which is going to happen like turn 1 because of the leader itself.
Absolutely.
So it gave the deck 4 more super combos, which was, part of why Vegex was, a whole tier above the rest of the game, was because it was playing 8 super combos. And now, Invoker, on top of just being a hard control deck, has 8 super combos.
Exactly. Yeah, but so that's kind of our general testing results with the newer format, is that for sure Invoker is going to be like one of the decks to beat, just because of its pure survivability, control, and then combo finishers, and as well as the consistency of those things.
Yes, that deck is extremely consistent.
So next we're going to move into a general list of meta decks for each, I would say, archetype.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually kind of funny. My teammate Joey Palladino just put a video out for top 10 meta decks, so you should go check out his channel, Crossworlds TCG. But we're going to go over our take on a couple of decks for each different kind of archetype. So Josh, you want to handle aggro, since you seem to be the local aggro player?
Yeah. I would say, in terms of aggro, prior to set 10, I actually been testing out Reboot Gohan. I built a blue-green version. And it's definitely, like, I felt success playtesting against Invoker. Being able to, have built-in self-awakening. And I think what really makes Reboot Gohan stand out as a aggro deck is the fact that as more and more answers get, printed for battle cards, and then as, there's so many things that can hit battle cards in the combo set, whether it's free counterplays coming out in set 10, battle cards have a lot of vulnerability, but there's really not a lot of cards that, can negatively impact your leader. There's not a lot of cards that power neg your leader. There's certain cards like Zamasu Super Combo, that can switch your leader to rest mode. But it's kind of like, unless you're going against a yellow strategy, not a lot of cards, not a lot of color. The other colors don't really have inherent answers for leaders. And so that's what I like about Gohan as an aggro deck, is that your strength is in your leader. You have the basically built in on your backside, your ability to go triple strike. And what I really like about it is that obviously you have feet Kamehameha. So the way I kind of tailored my build is it's blue-green, so it's kind of like it's aggro, but it's also hand destruction. Because you have 18 super combo, which makes your opponent bottom deck a card. And then you have, I play the Son Goku and Gohan Arrival, which comes in play for a blue-green, and it makes your opponent discard a card. And then you can go into UI. So basically it's like the deck is built around, rushing your opponent down, trying to get them basically from 6 to 0. Because once they're at 6, you can swing a leader. And if they're not able to negate your leader swing, then you're able to go in with the triple strike crit to get them down to 3. And then from that point on, the whole rest of the game, you're able to go in with triple strikes that are essentially going in for lethal. And it kind of forces your opponent they either have to negate, or they're just going to have to out-combo you. And while you're eating away at your hand, in that scenario, your game plan is you're going to have a bigger hand size than them. And so that's what makes Gohan really stand out. Another aggro is red aggro, which, has been a little undertested, I would say. I know before the U3 ban, there was a Burn Han U3 deck going around that I'm kind of happy about the U3 ban because, yeah, I didn't have that much experience playing against it, but I saw, I obviously saw the list, and I know it took like an online tournament, and yeah, it just didn't seem like a fun deck to play against. I think that's a good thing, but I do think red aggro, other strategies like that definitely have a place, especially with the new Barlock the Resolute card.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of set 10 is that a lot of things have been unexplored by the community and or maybe just publicly unexplored. And so like you're saying, the red that we personally haven't explored too much, maybe there's a really good deck there that isn't found yet. But I think that's a sign of a well-designed set.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about mid-range. We are going to headline it with Vegex, who is still in the meta, still in the format. It's been kind of isolated into mid-range now, though. Before it was, the aggro deck, the combo deck, and still an extremely solid mid-range deck. But with the banning of the Universe 3 cards, we're now sitting just in mid-range with maybe a couple corner cases of aggro with, certain builds where you prioritize double strikes and, Majin Buu extinction attack, stuff like that. But the mid-range and the actual Vegex engine, which previously was just not even worth looking at, is actually pretty strong. The Vegex cards are pretty cool, pretty powerful. The Champ Pack one, if you're unlucky with your Trunks and Vegeta mills, but you mill the Champ Pack Vegex, you've already got your EX Evolved target on board because it's a 6-drop, and it's a big 6-drop. The one that I really like, though, is the quote-unquote Deadly Defender. It's a 5-drop, and you can union it from pieces in your warp or exile zone. And it's is it 24 or 25k?
Something like that. It's pretty big.
It's a big boy, and he says if he's in arrest mode, your opponent cannot attack him with cards, period, or they can't attack your leader with anything that is 15,000 power or higher. They have to attack that Vegex. And that opens up kind of an interesting line where you can play, like more counter plays. You can play Ultimate Blow. You can play like the actual Deadly Defenders for black, stuff like that, and play more of a mid-range control game. It just kind of brings, a fresh, kind of more fair experience to Vegex rather than, you're just ending the game on turn 2 or 3.
I totally agree. I think that Black is really piggybacking on the strength of their super combo, the Bibbidi super combo specifically.
Definitely.
I think it's one of the identities of that color. We had the, I forget the full name, but it's Mira, the Mira Champa combo, where the
Creator Absorbed.
Yeah, that's the one. So we had the Creator Absorbed Mira, where you swing, get 5k per card in your warp, and then just like the general power additions with cards is kind of like their gimmick, I guess. And so it's really been helpful, I think, especially in like Tim's testing, being able to focus the deck around Bibbidi.
Definitely. I think before the printing of Bibbidi, just black decks in general were struggling. Because they didn't really have anything unfair that they were doing besides Turles, which I think could probably be brought back.
Potentially. Yeah, I think I've always said this from the beginning, but I think black as a color should have had a specified cost and a little bit more identity.
Mm-hmm.
But because they made it sort of like this colorless color, it's like running a mono artifact deck in Magic. You pretty much don't see that very much
outside of like Tron.
Right, but I think don't they still run some like
Tron usually plays
blue spells
like
or something.
There's mono blue Tron that plays like gigantic blue spells for no reason. or there's, the more traditional Tron that splashes green for Ancient Stirring, so they can search out their Tron pieces and make giant mana and then play a Karn on turn 3 and you scoop.
Anyways.
But yeah, so more mid-range decks. I haven't personally explored them a whole lot, but I've watched a lot of people playing them. Yellow Go Tanks feel like is just the new de facto yellow leader you play, kind of like old Broly BR. Even if you're not running the Go Tanks engine, the leader is just extremely strong.
Right. Stream plug there, Emperor Couscous, Monday through Friday.
And then starter deck Vegito, the new blue one. I feel like that started out pretty fair, mono blue or blue yellow, whatever. And then another content creator, was it Eggman?
For the Revive deck?
Yeah. Eggman came out with the blue-green Revive strategy.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something, that deck is nuts.
Yeah, just being able to have an engine that... Because one of the problems with the deck was drawing, and so the leader has a built-in when one of his things dies, like a battle card or a Unison, draw a card, untap an energy. But it was like, okay, well, my opponent has to attack into my blue cards. Well, with Revive, you get to trigger your KOing your own battle card on their turn, which triggers your leader's effect to draw. So basically, you put the power of killing your stuff to draw in your court while it's still on their turn.
Yes, that deck is pretty unique, pretty cool. Not really sure if there's, at least I haven't tested or really seen much of other kind of mid-range strategies. I know people were starting to look a little bit more into like Toa, but I don't know if I'd put that as more mid-range or control. But we'll kind of see how the format shakes out with, adding some more stuff into aggro or mid-range or stuff like that. But do you want to talk a little bit about hand control? Because I know you've tested a bit of that.
Yeah, I've been playing the mono green starter Frieza leader. The hand control archetype in general was prevalent back in the day with Cell Chain, but it was kind of like this sort of combo hand control where put your hand to 3, then to 0 with 3 Android 16 super combos and like a Toa Overrealm. And then it wasn't really like a hand control, like a steady hand control. It was just combo hand control. And so I think with this new set, we got a more steady hand control. We also got some combo hand control with the Maiden stuff, but so this steady hand control got very playable. One of the decks, like the one Tim said I was playing, is Frieza, the mono green Frieza. And he's pretty cool because he allows you to discard cards with the Unison and then play them from your drop, which gives you a draw engine if you run Frieza's Army Healing Pod. So that's like a pretty good draw engine, which is one of the weaknesses of hand control generally, is that they have to play a bunch of cards to rip your hand, and so then they have a small hand, and it doesn't really matter. But this deck in general can get like an 18 card hand and still put yours to 0 very easily, especially with the new promos like the promo Zarbon, which I personally think is going to be a pretty big problem when they come out, because usually those are limited supply, as well as the fact that it can just keep doing it each turn, discard 2, discard 2, discard 2.
I think this is the first like real hand control deck since the very short-lived Super Shenron hand control that I ruined our locals with for a little while.
That deck doesn't exist
anymore. That wasn't okay. But I think this is the first like real like competitive hand control deck since then.
Right, I would say yeah. Then we do have 2 more on our list here. Those being Dredgeku. Dredgeku's kind of in an interesting spot. I'll talk about that in a second. And then the third one is Wymat Goku. Again, plug Joey Palladino Cross Worlds TCG. I just saw that deck today. It was pretty fire. But back onto Dredgeku. Dredgeku is a deck, and we call it Dredge because there's a magic mechanic that says when you would draw a card and a card with Dredge is in your drop, you can instead mill equal to the dredge amount on the card in your drop and add that card back to your hand instead of drawing. So basically, like, it plays a bunch of cards into the drop, and then it uses the drop as its hand by milling more cards. And so that's sort of what this deck does, is that the leader mills 3 per turn, and he plays a bunch of cards that, like Hasty Dispatch Dispo, where if you don't have a board, you can warp it to play a 1-drop from your drop for free. Or, Sane Instincts, the dreaded 100 and whatever dollar card that pay 2, warp it, draw 2. And then it can also run like the Maiden, the counterpart to Sane Instincts, pay 2, make your opponent ditch 2, and just all these cards that in the drop have an effect. And so this deck isn't like straight up hand control, but what it generally does is it can awaken turn 1, and then it'll, if needed, blow up the opponent's board, which it can do on the backside, and then from there try to control their hand by using its drop to gain advantage. I don't really like it personally because it doesn't really maintain that big of a hand, even though it's very toolboxy, but it has been testing pretty powerful. I'm just waiting for us to get a ley line effect that says no more drop.
Like a ley line of the void.
Yeah, that one. That'd be great.
I do think a small addition to hand control.
Real quick before Tim, sorry to interrupt, but for those of you that don't know, Ley Line of the Void says, like, while it's in play, your drop zone has no effects. You can't do anything from the drop, basically.
Yeah, so once the ley line enters play, any card that would be put into your opponent's graveyard or drop instead goes to the warp or exile.
Yeah, so no more mill.
But like I was saying, a potential addition to hand control, I do see a resurgence of Toa popping up. It is going to be extremely reliant on whoever can get a hold of those tournament pack Toas, because I feel like the deck really is not going to work without those. It's the free Overwhelm 2 for 0 energy one.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the new cards are promos. They're going to be a little bit hard to get.
Next archetype we have is Control, which I know we mentioned a few of the decks briefly before. I don't think we need to go into Invoker too much because we already kind of hit a lot on that. There's Yellow Topo, which was primarily explored as a potential out to the combo / aggro / storm Vegex. I don't know if it's really going to be meta relevant anymore. There's not really a deck that's doing what Vegex was doing, so
I think it will be that niche jungle deck. And when I say jungle, for those of you that don't know, that means the early Swiss rounds in a big tournament. I think it'll be the jungle deck that catches people off guard, and those of them, those are the top cut people that are like X1 or whatever, will be like, oh yeah, I lost a Topo, but then never see it again. Yeah.
The next one, which I really don't see ever really leaving a meta, is Hatchiyak. So the leader just in and of itself kind of breaks a rule of the game where it just stops your opponent from being able to attack with things. And as in this game, attacking is the way to kill your opponent. There's not really another way to do it outside of Janemba.
Right. And that's also one of the reasons why we think Invoker is arguably the deck to beat in this current format, because not only does it have strategies to beat almost every deck outside of Control, but if you're playing against Hatchiyak, you don't have to attack to win.
That is true. And then the last one, unless we have any other Control decks, is Sin Shenron, which is a completely new deck and archetype introduced with set 10. Basically, you open up your Dark Dragon Ball and evolve up into a small Sin Shenron or Haze Shenron. Ideally, you want to go into Sin, and then turn 2, you go up into the 9-drop, which is like a 30k blocker, revenge blocker that like negates skills on your opponent's battle cards.
Yeah, it does that, and then also the leader restands it at the end of the turn.
Yeah. So you just have this gigantic blocker that kills whatever it touches and gets to, restand at the end of your turn.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those decks that, and Josh, you can elaborate on this after, but one of those decks where they present their game plan and they say answer it or lose.
I do feel like while it is extremely strong and probably going to be very frustrating and hard to deal with, the deck, at least from what I've seen, doesn't really have a way to close out the game. So I mean, the defender's a single strike, and as far as I know, they're not playing double strike effects, so they don't really have a way to close out the game.
Yeah, for sure. I think Sin Shenron, it's definitely inherently a very defensive deck. Like you said, so basically with the ability of going up their chain is they're able to get the 30k revenge blocker out on turn 2. And what's also interesting about what's really good about the 9-drop is it also has the effect where if your opponent removes it because it doesn't have barrier, so like if it gets KO'd or removed by a skill, it actually allows you to draw 2 cards. It lets you draw cards, and I believe it brings back out the small
Dragon Ball.
The Dragon Ball, which will allow you to go into your chain. So it already kind of has the built-in protection where, yeah, your opponent can kill it, but they're giving you hand size, and you can easily, your next turn follow up and go right back into the 9-drop. So it lets you recycle your chain. And then in regards to like not having a finisher, I do think inherently the deck kind of struggles with that because as it is more defensive, but Sin has the activate main on the backside for, I believe it's 6 energy that lets you
yellow, yeah.
that lets you play up to 7 shadow dragons.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have to be different names.
Yes, they do.
Yes, so they have to be unique, but basically, I mean, so if you have all the, obviously the target, because it's from drop area, right?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure it's drop, yeah. So you can essentially, if, all the stars align and they're there, you're basically paying 6 and you're getting 7, you could get 7 battle cards on board. So it's like, bam, go wide, and all of that can attack your opponent. Or, and it's like, if that doesn't close out the game, it's like, well, if your opponent doesn't have an immediate out to like clear your board, like you're for sure going to win the turn after that, because that's just so much advantage.
Absolutely. It's definitely answer this deck, answer my board, or I'm eventually going to win.
I think maybe as a finisher, so I know a lot of people were wanting to play the promo secret rare. I think maybe it should play the SS4 Gogeta instead, because they're going to charge all yellow. It is kind of a nombo with the Sin Shenron chains if they remove it, but then you also have a 45k triple strike.
And that's a fair point. I think between that and then maybe like Smoke Dragon, you'll have a decent amount of finishers once the deck evolves into its final form.
Could you imagine if Smoke Dragon had the Shadow Dragon
Yeah,
tag?
that was literally the first thing
God.
that I looked for. I was like, is this guy a Shadow Dragon? Because
that would have been nuts.
Playing Smoke?
Let's go buy out some Shadow Smoke Dragons. But
One
sadly, it's
can
not.
dream.
We can dream. Alrighty, so let's move on to our next topic here, which is combo. And at the top of the list, we have, once again, Invoker. And in quotes, I have the word burn. Specifically, Invoker burn. There are other versions. If you wanted to play more control, it would be different. But I just want to point out, I'm not going to go into any depth about the deck anymore. But Invoker has hit 3 sections of our archetypes that speaks words. And as well as Invoker, we have Reboot Gohan, which that's actually his second archetype as a combo leader, because you can kind of OTK your opponent if they're not running enough negates or blockers or whatever. So just keep that in mind for different strategies and play styles of those 2 decks.
I think, just real quick with Reboot Gohan, for combo decks, I think it's more specifically blue-green, because you have that starter deck, was Android 16, that says KO and energy, free play it. So you just get more attacks out of it.
For no energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other little tag on Reboot Gohan with set 10 in mind, that I'm looking into, because I'm looking into revamping my deck once set 10 comes out, and I get my hands on the product officially. Is that the addition of Demigray Unison. I really like the prospects of that in Reboot Gohan, because you can drop him down, as early as turn 1, and with Gohan, he can already take two life on leader swing. So if you're going second and you establish Demigray Unison, Demigray Unison has the effect of if he were to lose counters, you can opt to take a life instead. So it puts in a Demigray's plus effect is he gives himself plus 10, so he's a 15k attacker. So it lets you continue to be aggressive and push your opponent down to the life that you want them at, and it puts your opponent in a tough spot because it's either if they choose to swing into your Unison to get rid of it, they're just helping you self-awaken. So they're basically forced to either, let you self-awaken, or they're just not, or they're going to let you just, just keep your Demigray Unison on board, which means you still have more attacks. So it puts them in kind of a lose-lose scenario. So I really like that. And there's also the, like Caleb was mentioning earlier, the color-specific cards. There's that SS3 Goku that's is a free play 15k crit, and if you make your opponent, anytime you make your opponent discard a card, he comes and play for free. So by playing kind of the blue-green, hand destruction, route with like Cell's Earth Destroying Kamehameha, you combo that, you make him discard a card, and then you bam free play the SS3 Goku, and now you get to hit him for crit.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
I really like those additions.
Definitely, Gohan's looking pretty good for set 10, as far as the older deck that gets bumped up by all the new stuff. And then our last archetype is one that is near and dear to my heart because of one specific leader, and that's going to be our Surge archetype. I feel like they've kind of gone into their own area now that we're in a new block that supports monocolor. So like these dual color decks are almost their own thing.
They're in a weird place for sure.
Yeah, they kind of play by their own rules. And so on the top of the list, I'm just going to take this one, is Surge Broly. I have put terror in many local players with my Surge Broly deck. If you guys watched Marcus's stream like a week ago, I think it was, I was on there. We played some games, and a lot of people underestimate the deck, and it's more powerful than you think. So test it out. You can use my list. Message me if you want on Facebook, and I'll give you some pointers, but definitely test it out. It's stronger than people give it credit for.
Next Surge leader, not going to go a whole lot into it because we've gone into pretty much every iteration of that deck there is right now, but Surge Invoker or Surge Goku, whatever you want to call
Surge Boogeyman.
That is, another pillar of the format and one of the only remaining playable Surge leaders. The last one I honestly have not touched at all. I know you guys have at least looked into it. Josh or Caleb, do you guys want to talk about Surge Cell?
Yeah, for Surge Cell, I experimented with Surge Cell back in set 9, meta when he first came out. And yeah, back then I think it was good, but it really struggled with, hand size, and it felt like it didn't do as much as, say, like Surge Broly and Surge Ku.
And Surge Piccolo.
Yeah, and Surge Piccolo. But what's really nice about with set 10 is the new cards that, are basically being able to go into Surge Cell. Like there's the new 9-drop SR Cell, which I think the card is really good. And it's basically because the leader, Surge Cell, allows you to look, activate main, you look at the top 5 cards, and you get to grab any card. It's so literally any card, grab it to your hand, and then you choose a card to discard. So it makes it really easy to find the pieces that you're looking for. And then it's an easy way to like put, say, cards like Saiyan Instincts Grade 8 in the drop area without having to, just combo it unnecessarily. Like you get the value of the cards you want in the drop area. There's also the 17 that plays itself from the drop area for 1 energy if you have no board. so you can easily pitch that. But what's nice about the new SR cell is its effect is, so it has two. Well, the first effect is if it's in your drop area, I believe it's you warp it, and then it lets you draw a card, and it's no cost. So it's like if you, let's say if you have that cell in hand, you do your leader's effect. Yeah, double check just to make sure I'm getting the effect right. Thank you, Tim.
I'm working on it.
All right, but I know it's like it basically turns your leaders normally which it would be a +0 into a +1, because if you're able to scry the top, get one of the cards out of the top 5. If you put that cell in the drop, and then you use that effect, then you're actually plussing 1 off of your leader effect instead of evening it out. And then it also has the effect of you KO your board, you sack your board, and you're able to free play it. And it's a 9-drop. And so what the card really allows is it lets your SCR Cell Xeno come out to the field really easily, because you sack your board to play the cell, and then you have the Champ Pack 18, which allows you to pay 1 energy to play it from the drop if the only cards on your board are cell. And the 18 is a 3-drop. So just by having the cell SR out and the 18, you're able to easily go into the SCR Cell Xeno. Another good thing about the deck is its inherent boss monsters, which are the successor 9-drop Cell and the successor 9-drop Super 17. What's nice about them is, as we all know and we've mentioned throughout this video is, the big bad deck is Invoker. And not all the lists, but quite a few of them, Invoker plays Royal Condemnation, which is a counterplay that stops any 8-cost battle cards or less from coming into play. And so since your boss monsters are 9 costs, you're safe from Royal Condemnation. So you make sure, and that's what's really nice about Cell is he doesn't have to. He can attack, but you're able to plus and draw cards without having to attack your opponent. So since one of your boss monsters is Super 17, you're able to kind of play that hand destruction route, and you're able to gain advantage without attacking your opponent. You could leave them at 8 life if they don't have any self-awakening, and then you go into Super 17 and you're able to instantly crit them down to 4 life. And by being able to do that, boom, they're at 4 life, and then you're able to follow up by going into your Cell Xeno, which has Quad Strike, and you just hit them from 4 to 0.
Yeah, I mean, all the things that Josh mentioned are really good about the deck. I think two things I want to mention about the deck. One is the surge effects on the back. The one in particular I'm talking about is where it Crusher Balls your opponent's whole next turn. I think that's very relevant in this upcoming format, because if they're preparing for a power turn, you can just do that and say, hey, your next turn, don't play any. Well, if you want to play battle cards, go ahead. They're going to be in rest mode. So it kind of stunts them for a turn and gives you an extra turn if you need one more turn to go off, or if they're preparing for something powerful. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is that I feel like the deck really rewards people who get to the mastery level with it. And because of that is because there's all these small interactions on, like what Josh was saying, where you can only play this card from your hand if you only have cells in play, or if you have no board, you can do this. And so you really need to master the sequencing and learn the ins and outs against different decks. And so if you pick up the deck and you don't perform well with it, just keep giving it tries, because eventually I think you'll be able to do well once you learn the really masterful sequencing.
Definitely. I think as the game progresses and new card types and mechanics and stuff are introduced, it's becoming more and more apparent that you have to get to a point where you know how to sequence and can master a deck if you want to do well.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that brings up another just quick point about, like you said, about knowing when to combo and mastering, is I think the other kind of paradigm that Set 10 and the Unisons brought about is there's also times where you kind of need to know since Unisons are a constant threat, you have to know when is it the right time to say go after your opponent's Unison and make them lose markers. So to prevent them from like doing their ultimate effects, or should you just ignore the Unisons and it's time to go after their leader and go out face and try to deal damage? And I think there's certain game states where that kind of puts a fine line of like where you need to decide. It kind of increases the decision making, of like what's the most optimal play that you can do this turn. Like, do you think you can win this turn if you go straight at face, or do you think if you don't go at Unison, you can't win this turn, but maybe you need to go after if you can't win this turn, maybe you need to go after Unison to prevent for them from killing you the following turn.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the beauties of, in my opinion, a well-designed set, is that it challenges the players not to just deck build good, but to play good. And that's really where the limit lies, is masterful playing rather than playing the best strategy. And so that's something that's made this set very enjoyable for me.
Absolutely.
All right, I think that was all we had for this episode.
Yep. Any final words, guys?
No, not really. I think it, like we just mentioned, this set's gonna, for the most part, come down to mastering your play versus playing, a net deck.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of the overall like learn from set 10 is that there's definitely a lot of we mentioned a lot of decks that are viable and that can very well be considered to be tier 1 or brought to the competitive level to tournaments, and I think it really is going to reward one, mastering the deck you're playing, but also just knowing the ins and out of every potential matchup you could face, and you'll definitely find better success practicing against those matchups.
Absolutely. Alrighty, guys. Thank you for tuning in to the Sideboard podcast. This is Tim and Caleb signing out. We'll see you next time.
See ya.